Good morning, everyone. It looks like we're slowly building up our participants. We have over 50 people signed up for the session this morning, and we're about 20% occupancy right now. So we'll give it another minute or two before we get rolling.
And you're all muted right now just so that we can keep the sound quality good, but please feel free to use the chat feature to say hello to each other. If you see anybody that you recognize, you can talk to them either privately or you can just chat with the group overall. I guess you can all tell I have two screens as I keep looking to the side, but if I pull in, I'm pulling in now you can all see each other too, on your screen and my screen.
All right, so we still have some people coming in. I think we'll give it another minute or so, and then we will get started. We want to be respectful of everyone's time, and we only have an hour, and we have a lot of quick information to cover. So. All right, well, it's 11:02. So we have people who are continuing to join in with us this morning. Just wanted to welcome everyone to Coffee with Catalyst, this session that we are very happy to host this morning, and to work with Caitlin at the Regional Foundation Center of the Free Library of Philadelphia. Thank you so much for giving us the opportunity to provide this session for everyone. Everyone is muted, so we will be using the chat feature, which you should find at the bottom of your screen. It's hard for me not to talk with my hands, which you'll find at the bottom of your screen. And I will be monitoring questions and working with Cindy to try to get as many of your questions answered as we're able to. There's also a raise your hand feature that will flag you to me. So again, I'm Liz Vibber. I'm with the Catalyst Center for Nonprofit Management, and I'm going to turn things over real quick to Caitlin Seifert, who I know is on the call from the Regional Foundation Center, to say good morning. I'm going to unmute her to do some welcoming remarks. All right.
Good morning. Hi, good morning, everyone. Thank you to the Catalyst Center for doing this webinar today for the Regional Foundation Center patrons. Really appreciative of that. I just wanted to quickly let everyone know, kind of what's going on with the Regional Foundation Center right now, even though our doors are closed. I just wanted to let you know how we've been supporting nonprofits at this time. So one of the big things we're doing is we're able to provide remote access to Foundation Directory Online Essential at this time. So if you're looking to research funding opportunities, you can use this pared down version of Foundation Directory Online from home to do that. If you've used the professional version that we have at the library, it's very similar, same search structure. You just don't get as much information. But if you find that you're doing research and need more information that's not available in the essential version, you can send me an email and I'm more than happy to run that search for you. We are also going to be hosting some more virtual programs next month in May. We're looking to move our grant writing series online and do that remotely, so definitely stay tuned for that. We're also going to be offering our monthly expert office hours with RSVP volunteer executive consultants. The topic for May is going to be finances and budget. So if you have questions related to that and want to meet one-on-one with a consultant, we do have a few slots available for that still. So in the chat, I'm just going to put a link in there that gives you a little bit more information about what we're providing at this time, how to sign up for our newsletter, as well as some additional funding resources and our contact information. So if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. I'm more than happy to answer your questions as best as I can. So thank you again to Liz and Cindy.
Great. Thanks, Caitlin. All right, Cindy, do you want to lead us off?
Certainly, yep. So again, thank you to the Regional Foundation Center for this coffee break. We've been getting a lot of questions about the CARES Act and the Family First Act. At this stage, things have moved very quickly, and I would imagine that some of you are very well versed on both of these things. We're going to move through an overview, though, of both of them, including some of the loan provisions. And if you have any questions, please type them in your chat box, and Liz will jump in and ask them. So if you have a question on a specific slide, don't hesitate to jump in and ask the questions. Just a disclaimer, as you know, things have changed very quickly. As of last night, these things are up to date. On each slide, you'll see a link, and we will make these slides available on our website at Catalyst Center for Nonprofit Management. The links are there so that you can go back and check and see has anything changed, or if you see something that seems different from what you've heard, you can double check and see where we got the information from. Before you take any action on anything that we're sharing, please talk to your own accountants or your attorneys before proceeding. So yesterday, the announcement was made that the funds that were allocated to the Paycheck Protection Program loan and also the funds for the EIDL loan have been exhausted. They were all distributed to the banks. And I know that some of you have been through the process with your banks, and perhaps some of you on the line were successfully funded. Some of you did everything you could to get your information in with your bank on time, but depending on who your bank was, perhaps through no fault of your own, you were unable to be funded. And I know that's been very frustrating for a number of our clients. Some of you might not have employees, so this might not have been something that worked for you, or for other reasons, this did not work for you. However, I'm going to briefly highlight it because it's possible that more funds will come into the program. So if you're still thinking about this, I would encourage you to apply if you think that you could apply to you. If your application is in the trail and you haven't been approved yet, there's some information that you should be aware of. And then if you have been approved, there's a lot of questions still around forgiveness. We'll touch on that. But basically what this loan program did is that it's really ideal if you're in a situation where you can still deliver your services. So if there's still demand for your services, and based on the funds that you have either in savings or perhaps still coming in, depending on the nature of your programs, if you reasonably think that you can maintain employee headcount and payroll through June 30th, this could be a program for you. It allows you to borrow up to 2.5 times your monthly compensation. And then at a certain point after you receive the loan, the bank will look at what you spent the money on, and it can forgive 8 weeks of payroll, plus rent, plus utilities. You know, I have the phone in there. That was on some you know, depending on if phone is considered a utility, I've seen mixed results on that. And if you have a building, it could be your mortgage interest. Payroll is capped at $100,000 for the individual. Health insurance and retirement expenses on your payroll, that can go over the 100,000. So if you had somebody, let's say your executive director that needs $100,000 of their pay would go towards payroll, but then if you pay $12,000 a year for their health insurance, you can still use that total $12,000. The attractiveness of this loan was that opportunity to get part or all of the loans forgiven. It really could be a big help to nonprofits and businesses because basically the impact that you might have over the next 8 to 12 weeks, you'd be getting some of that forgiven from the government. To the extent that it's not forgiven, the remainder of the loan would be paid back over 2 years and an interest rate of 1%. Any questions? All right. I was able to mute. I think there's some background noise coming through. The next, so there were a couple of questions that came around this. To the extent, I do still have a handful of clients that were in the middle of applying. If that's you, I would encourage you to continue to apply. We just talked about this question about the 100,000. Some bank applications asked you originally to subtract federal taxes. This was clarified about 10 days ago. Payroll should be reported at gross and not reduced for any taxes. If your bank still has a loan application that has federal taxes in there, you can put 0 in on that loan application. I believe at this stage, most banks have modified their application. As mentioned, the $100,000 exclusion does not apply to benefits. So when we think about forgiveness, so if you were fortunate enough to receive the loan, there's a lot of questions around forgiveness and what that means. So the forgiveness looks at a couple of different features. One is compensation, and the other is these other expenses. The other expenses are held to a maximum of 25%. So the government really wants this loan to go towards compensation and keeping people employed. So if you look, let's say you applied for a loan, you got $200,000. You're only going to be able to spend $25,000 of that on things like rent and utilities and mortgage interest. The other 75% you need to spend on salary during that 8-week period. The 8-week period is measured from the date that you received the funds. So let's say you received notice that you were approved and you don't get the funds until May 1st, your 8 weeks starts counting on May 1st. Are there any questions on that? The other element of this, when we talk about compensation, is the idea that if you have employees, each employee needs to get 75%, at least 75% of the salary that they were getting in a prior 8-week period. I've heard two things on this. I've heard that it's the same 8-week period from the prior year, as far as what that represents. But then I've also heard that it's the 8-week period that preceded the next these coming 8 weeks. So there are some of the things, as all of you are pretty well acquainted from, that are still up in the air and things are changing rapidly. So definitely check in with your accountant if you've gotten a loan. If you've gotten notice that you've gotten a loan, what you want to do is start to project out, how am I going to make sure that I can get as much of this forgiven as possible? The other element of this is to maintain headcount. And so the headcount, you have an option to use either 2 different periods when we look at full-time equivalents. You can compare last year, February 15th to June 30th, compared to this year, February 15th to June 30th as far as headcount. Or you can look at January 1st of this year to February 15th. So, you know, if I've done my calculations as far as the number of weeks in each period, this longer period has about 760 hours. This shorter period has 240 hours. You are going to use what a normal work week. So in this example, I've used 40 hours. If your normal work week is 35 hours, you'll want to use the appropriate work week.
Cindy, we have a question regarding what happens if an employee leaves on their own accord? How does that affect that 75% of your payroll?
That's a really good question. I imagine that it is something that they will accommodate for because it's just a very practical situation. I haven't seen any specific guidance around that yet, but I think that something will come to light on that end. If we want to take an example, if you were going to look at this longer period, in this particular example, you're going to see that, let me go back, sorry. We have February to June 19, February to June 2020. If we add up each individual's hours, you know, with nonprofits, you could have a lot of people who work different schedules. So maybe last year, Tim worked 370, Emma worked 250. This year, you got a new employee, and maybe you have a situation where two of your people worked less this year during this time period. You could have your regular people work less. So this time last year, you could have had 3.3 full-time equivalents, total number of hours worked divided by number of hours in a normal pay period. Now you have 3.37. If this is the case, you're fine. You know, you had different people working different hours, but when all is said and done, you've maintained your head count. We can contrast that. What if you had a different situation where last year there were fewer people compared to this year? You could look at a different schedule. You could look at January 2020 to February. And so you can see how this is a different type of situation here. So you can use whatever situation works better for you. The January to February, I would encourage you to calculate it in both ways. Let's say as of March 15th, you were in a situation and you decided that it was better for you to lay off several employees. Meanwhile, you've applied for the loan and you find out that you get the loan in May 1st. At May 1st, you can rehire the employees that you've furloughed, and you would have, the way the statute's written right now, it says you'd have until June 30th to get them up to 75% of compensation. Again, it's not clear because there's this talk about 8 weeks. So May 1st to June 30th is longer than 8 weeks. So, you know, does that mean that May 1st you get the loan? You know, could you rehire the person by May 8th and still try to get up to the 75% of compensation? I expect that we're going to see guidance start to come out very soon on these things. But conceptually, so far, anytime there's been additional guidance coming out, it has been consistent with the government's objective that they would prefer that employers can hang on to employees and pay their employees if at all possible. So that my hope is that when we see guidance, it would be consistent with that. Questions? So somebody's saying, what about part-time employees who worked a different number of hours each week? That's where when we go back to our example, so you have, you know, these part-time people, you're going to want to add their hours in these weeks. So, you know, if you have several part-time employees, you're going to want to add the number of hours and make this calculation to find out your full-time equivalents. For the 75% of compensation, let's say you had part-time employees and, you know, whatever that period of 75% of compensation is, those part-time employees are going to need to work at least 75% of the part-time hours that they worked in the prior period. So that's the part that you're going to want to monitor when it comes to part-time employees. Do other people have questions around part-time employees? I think we're going to see a lot of situations like this, where people want to rehire people, they want to get the loan forgiveness, but depending on your circumstances, you might get the loan as of May 1st, but do you have enough work to keep people busy? We have some nonprofit clients who have received the loan. They're going to bring back some furloughed employees, and they're going to need to come up with some projects for them to do because they still have needs for their services, but because of the nature of what the services that they provide, some of the things they just can't do right now because they can't be face-to-face with their clients. So they're going to have to find some projects for these employees to do so that they can get up to these compensation levels. So it is a little bit tricky. We have a client, they have people who go into people's homes. They provide services to children, and the parents have said, we really don't want people coming into our homes right now. The employees do not have to work in order to receive the payroll. This is the opinion that this client got from their attorney. So the employees will be not working, but they will still get at least 75% of their salary. In our client's situation, this only applies to some of their employees. So I think in their situation, maybe 80% of their employees will be working and will be getting paid. 20% of their employees will not be working, but will still receive 75% of their salary. So, like I said, a little bit tricky, but you want to think about for your situation, how can you structure things so that you get the forgiveness? And even if it means that you have somebody who's not working but still getting paid, that could be what you're ending up doing. If you get the loan, it has been encouraged. It's the hard part, as hard as the last 2 weeks were in applying for the loans and figuring that out, it's going to be even harder for the banks to figure out this forgiveness amount. So you want to make it as easy as possible for your bank to ascertain what level of forgiveness you're eligible for. So it's encouraged that you set up a separate bank account. You don't necessarily have to pay every single paycheck out of that separate bank account, but you're going to want to transfer the amount from that bank account to cover your payroll and your other expenses like rent as they are paid. And this will make it easier for the bank to navigate the situation. Save all your documentation and really schedule things out to make it easy for your bank to see that you're eligible for forgiveness. If you've done all these different measures and you still find that, like, let's say you get $200,000 and you work through it, you do the very best you can, but there's still $30,000 that can't be forgiven. You've still had $170,000 forgiven. If you have $30,000 that you have to pay back, over 2 years at 1% interest, you've still received $170,000 to move yourself forward. The other loan that was available, again, as of yesterday, there was a lapse in appropriations and new applications are not available for this loan. That was up to a 30-year term, 2.75% rate for nonprofits. If your nonprofit is structured so that you can normally build up a surplus year after year and you take on debt and you feel that you'll be able to repay this could be an option for you if funds free up. However, I would say that in our situation, most of our nonprofit clients might take on debt for a building project. They might have a line of credit to tide them over if they're waiting for like county or state funding. But most nonprofits do not go into debt for operations. And for many nonprofits, it would have been very difficult for them to take on this loan because they faced economic injury. It would be very difficult for them to build up a surplus in the coming years to pay back this loan. There's other measures that we've seen nonprofits take as opposed to pursuing this loan. There was an element of this, though, that gave you an emergency award of $10,000. It was measured, you could get $1,000 per employee. So if you had 20 employees, you'd be able to get $10,000 just to tide you over. they were trying to get this $10,000 out to people as quickly as possible, just to tide them over. The National Council of Nonprofits has this comparison. There is another mid-sized loan program that's for larger nonprofits between 500 and 10,000 employees. This has not been, it says largely undefined loan program. It hasn't been thoroughly defined yet. But if you think about the larger nonprofits that could be dealing with a loss here, that's another option for them. The Council of Nonprofits, their link is here. They have a number of different resources that you might find useful. Other things to consider. So let's say for whatever reason you are able to continue, you have some payroll, you can consider deferring the employer share of FICA. So that's 6.2% of your payroll. You can defer it between April 1st and the end of this year, and then you can repay it in 2 installments in the following 2 years. So let's say your annual payroll is $400,000. That 6.2% would have been at $24,800. You could defer $18,600. That's the prorated portion between this period of time, and then you would pay back the $9,300 over the next 2 years. If this is your situation right now, every possible way that you can to conserve cash, even if you're finding yourself that you can still operate, this is the time to hold on to cash. So this is something that you want to consider. You can talk to your payroll company about it. There was the question, can you do this program along with the PPP loan? You can, but once you receive notice the loan is forgiven, you can't defer anymore. So if you applied for the PPP loan, you found out you got the loan, you can still defer your taxes until you get to the point where the loan is forgiven. Again, because in times like this, it's so important to conserve cash, I would strongly encourage you consider this deferral. You do need to repay it though, so you want to make sure that you can, once things start to get a little better, you want to make sure that you be able to save up the money to repay that at the end of 2020, at the end of 2021 and 2022. Also, we've had a number of questions about unemployment. This concept of furlough, we talk about a furlough and a layoff. Furlough does not have a legal definition. However, there's just generally accepted concept that furlough conveys a plan to rehire versus a layoff. So generally, when you're talking to your employees, if you say we have to furlough people, people have the sense, oh good, I'm going to get rehired. Generally, if you furlough somebody, the employee can still stay on your health insurance. If you have a situation where employees pay for their own health insurance, you can bill the employee for their share of health insurance. That they would send you a check, and they can get that. Many of our nonprofit clients are finding that in some cases their employees might make more on unemployment at least through July 31st. So as you've heard, the federal government has an add-on to unemployment. So whatever somebody's unemployment benefit is, they can get an extra $600 a week through July 31st. This is not, to my knowledge, as of yesterday, this wasn't completely operational yet, but they did say that it would go backwards. So people, once they get their checks from the federal government or from the state, that federal portion will be retroactive to April 1st. So let's say you have a nonprofit, you have employees making $52,000 a year, their weekly pay would be $1,000 a year. For many of our nonprofit clients, $52,000 a year for their frontline employees is a decent salary. For our nonprofits, a lot of their frontline employees are between $35,000 and $60,000. So in this example, if somebody's weekly pay is $1,000 a week, their estimated Pennsylvania unemployment is $500. Typically, Pennsylvania unemployment turns out to be about half of your weekly pay. It might vary depending on somebody's circumstances. There is a limit on that top level, but in this example, it's $500. The federal add-on is going to be $600. So now each week, this person's going to get $1,100, plus unemployment is not subject to Social Security tax, nor is it subject to Pennsylvania tax. So this person is going to get $218 extra a week, and over a 13-week period, they'll get $2,800. The federal government wanted to get money in the hands of people and to get more money into the economy. So this is the reason why, you know, there's not necessarily a cap. So in some cases, if you have to furlough employees from a financial standpoint, this might not be a bad situation. We cannot underestimate the mental impact of furloughing employees. We do recognize that it can be really hard to hear that for your employees. It creates a lot of uncertainty and a lot of stress. So we realize that making that decision is not necessarily made lightly. However, for you as the employer, what we've heard is that people have said to their employees, you know, it's really hard to furlough you right now, but I want, when this is over, I want you to have an organization to come back to, as opposed to keeping people on artificially because you're concerned about their mental health. So you say, well, we're just going to keep them on because we're more worried about furloughing them. Meanwhile, you've put the organization at jeopardy because you're eating into your savings. So while it's a very difficult decision, if you are in a situation where you are not able to continue on your mission right now, or you can't continue it completely, to seriously consider this option of furloughing to provide, to maintain your reserves and to maintain the health of your organization for the future. So that's something that you can keep in mind. Any questions on unemployment? Any things that you as an organization have wrestled with when you thought about unemployment, any conversations that you've had with employees? Other unemployment considerations. Pennsylvania does have a shared work program. You can reduce employee time by 20 to 40%. So an employee could work for you 3 days a week, and the other 2 days a week they could receive unemployment. It's unclear how that $600 federal unemployment works. Does it mean that they would get 60% of the unemployment? We don't know what that looks like. For this period of time, putting someone on unemployment would not affect your unemployment rate if you are temporarily closed. The one thing you need to watch out for, though, is that nonprofits are allowed to elect out of Pennsylvania unemployment. So if your nonprofit has historically been self-insured for unemployment, meaning that if somebody was unemployment, if you laid somebody off and they went on unemployment, in the past, if you were self-insured, the state would bill you dollar for dollar what they paid out on unemployment. Several nonprofits would go this route because it would be very rare that they would lay somebody off. So the risk of them having to pay that was low. There's this state solvency department where you can elect to pay this solvency fee to help mitigate the expense. This is only if you're self-insured. If you're already part of the Pennsylvania unemployment program, you're fine. But you do need to be aware of, if you're self-insured and you did not elect to pay the solvency fee, the federal government will reimburse half of unemployment at this time, but you as a nonprofit would have to pay the other half. There is a delayed billing. There's advocacy working to change that because it does put a burden on nonprofits if they have to lay people off. But it's something I do want to make you aware of. If you are not participating in Pennsylvania unemployment and you're thinking of laying people off, you need to be aware of this. Here's some links for you to get more information, and Pano has a really nice write-up on their site about this. If you don't get the PPP loan and you have had drops in revenue, there's an employee retention tax credit. The tax credit is so low that, and you have to have such a severe drop in revenue, that I'm not seeing people take advantage of this. If you have any questions, feel free to jump in on this, but I'm just going to go on to the next slide. The other situation that you might be running into is this Families First Act. This actually came out before the CARES Act. And what it's talking about is if you have an employee who has sick leave because they can't work, or they cannot telework due to a quarantine or isolation order. So this is either they or somebody in their immediate family that lives with them is sick, so therefore they have to stay home in quarantine. You still need to pay them for sick leave. The second part of this would be if you had an employee who their child school is closed or their daycare center is closed, so now they have to stay home and be with their child. After the first 2 weeks, for the next 10 weeks, you need to pay them 2/3 of their pay. Again, this is if they cannot work or telework. So this has been especially difficult in situations where somebody actually can telework, but their child is still home. So they still need to care for their child. So you have people waking up at 4 in the morning and trying to get work done, and then their child wakes up, they're caring for their child. It's been very stressful. If your worksite is closed completely, this paid leave requirement does not apply. So here you are, your employee cannot work, they cannot telework, they're caring for your child. You need to pay 2/3 of their pay for this 10 weeks. The government is providing a refundable payroll tax credit that will reimburse you for this pay. So it reduces your payroll taxes. If the costs of paying this out to your employee is larger than that reduction in payroll taxes, there's a Form 7200 where you can get a rapid refund. Any questions? There was a question on unemployment. Oh, okay. So there was a question on unemployment that's talking about, yes, absolutely. So one of the Becca had observed, and she's correct. So somebody is going to get the extra $600 a week. They will make more on unemployment. And then when it comes time to call them back to work, they'll make less. However, the extra $600 only goes through July 31st. And I think there's also the sense that somebody thinks, well, if I refuse to go back, I might not have a job to come back to. So let's say you're trying to call somebody back May 1st. They're thinking, meanwhile, they're making better on unemployment. They're risking losing their job if they don't come back to you. But you're right, that is an issue, and it's a concern as an employer when you're trying to get people to come back to work and to want to come back to work. One of the questions with this Family First Act was the idea of, can you arrange for intermittent leave? So if you have an employee from home who's also caring for children, maybe you have somebody who is working full-time. Now that they're home and caring for children, they can only get 20 hours a week in instead of the full 40 hours a week. Frequently asked questions at this website, 19 and 20, you could pay them half of their regular pay, and then the other half of the time, they'll get 2/3 of their pay under this Families First Act because you've arranged for intermittent leave so they can care for their children. And you as the employer will get reimbursed for this 2/3. Oh, go back. The other thing that we wanted to mention is the IRS has extended the due date. So if you had a December 31st year end, your IRS Form 990 was due May 15th. It's now been extended until July 15th. And this is the case for any nonprofits with a due date between April 1st and July 15th. The due date is now extended to July 15th, which is a big help. Even if you're a small nonprofit and you're just filing the 990N postcard, there's so many things happening. The fact that you have a little bit of extra time to pull things together, get things to your accountant, figure things out is a big help. We did want to talk about some things. There's some organizations, the ECFA and PANO and some other advocacy organizations are really reaching out to the federal government and talking about different things that can help nonprofits. So as you may have heard, there's now a charitable deduction that isn't part of the itemized deductions. It would allow people a $300 above the line charitable deduction, which is all really nice, but $300 is a drop in the bucket. So what these advocacy groups are asking is they're saying, let's just make let's increase that $300 above the line charitable deduction. They'd love to get it back to where it was many years ago. I think it was whatever it was a very large number. You could that even if you didn't itemize, if you donated to charity, you could take it right off of your taxes. So they're saying, if ever there was a time for this universal charitable deduction, now would be that time. That idea of the unemployment insurance, where it's currently at 50%, like I mentioned before, authorizing that to move up to 100%, increasing the limit for the Paycheck Protection Program since the funds have exhausted themselves. Special funding attention. As you can imagine, this is a very, very difficult time for people that are homeless, people that normally reach out to them, and people that normally do street outreach can't do that. Victims of domestic violence who are in their home, or are people that are living in shelters, or people that are living in residential facilities. A lot of special challenges there, so special funding attention. Payment from state and local agencies. A number of you on the line might have county or state contracts, and as you know, payments can be held up, especially at times like this. So making sure that those payments aren't delayed 60 or 90 days, but are very quickly, come quickly. There can be regulatory or contract requirements. We have some clients that still need to send paper documentation in order to get reimbursed. Obviously, that's not practical. So PANO is really urging state and counties to think about how they can look at their requirements and still make sure that things are being properly handled, but to loosen some of these requirements, especially when nonprofits need funds at this time. Any questions? Okay. When we were looking at the questions that you submitted when you registered, there are a couple of questions around cash management. As I mentioned before, you want to conserve cash. One of the things that I would encourage you to do, I think a number of people probably use QuickBooks. Whether you use QuickBooks or another accounting system, you can look at your accounting system and look at all the checks that you paid last April, last May, last June. Look at all those expenses and list them out. If it's something like QuickBooks, you're just literally going to pull up your profit and loss and look at your expenses. Look at the checks you wrote over the next 3 to 6 months and think, for all of these checks that we wrote, what are the ones that we absolutely have to keep paying? So if you have employees, then payroll might be something. If you can't keep employees busy, should you be furloughing them? Are there dues and subscriptions that you should hold off on? Is there training you can hold off on? Most nonprofits do not have an employer share of a retirement. Most nonprofits don't make that decision until the end of the year, or might not even have that. But if you do, talking to your insurance agent. If you have an insurance payment coming up, is there any way they can get that down? Is there any way they can, delay the payment for 30 to 60 days? I have seen some legislation around insurance with grace periods. Don't assume that, though. Don't assume that there's a grace period, but call. If your insurance agent does grant you a grace period, make sure that you get that in writing. This is not a time to realize you have a lapse of insurance. Maximize your credit. If you have a line of credit, making sure that's up to date. If you currently don't have a line of credit, is this a time that you should consider getting one? If you don't already have a line of credit, it probably would be difficult to get one at this time unless you own property or have a really good history, a good track record of revenues coming in. But look at that. But by the same token, you want to be very careful not to get yourself into a debt situation that you can't recover from. So look very critically at your expenses. If you work with vendors, call your vendors and say, normally I've been paying my bills with you every 30 days. And, can you give me an extension to 60 days or 90 days? Or, can I pay you $1,000 now and $1,000 in 60 days and $1,000 in 90 days? Recognize that your vendors, your landlord, they are in the same situation that you are. One of our clients has a strip shopping center with, I think, 12 different tenants. She has all of her tenants asking to hold off on paying her rent. Well, that's fine, but she also owes money to the bank. So she can extend her tenant's credit to the extent that the bank can give her credit, but that only lasts for so long. So talk to your vendors, have open lines of communication. We find that our nonprofit clients are really good with relationships and have a lot of really good relationships with their vendors. So this is a chance for you to talk and say, figure out where are people personally, how is your landlord doing? How are your vendors doing? And how can we all work together so that all of us can keep going and be sustainable? The other thing that you want to do, and we'll get into this more next week, is project your budget. Think about, 3 to 4 scenarios that, here was what the budget that we would have had. If we come in at 80% of this level, what would that look like? If we came in at 50% of this level, what would that look like? And if we went down to the bare minimum just to keep, us running as a nonprofit, what would that look like? One of our clients worked through this. She said it was a very hard exercise. It was something she didn't want to do, but just the fact that she had this down on paper, it just felt better to name it, to say, okay, this is the really worst case, but now we have a plan for what that worst case looks like. Talk to your board. We do sessions on board governance, and this is when having a strong board, having a board that works well really comes into play. I know that some of you are on the line right now feeling like, gee, I wish I had that. I don't have that in my board. Or maybe your board, maybe you do have a good board, but they're busy trying to keep their businesses afloat and can't help you right now. But to the extent that you can, reach out to your board members, even if they don't have the financial background, just somebody that you can bounce something off of and talk to. Call your accounting firm, talk to them. If you don't have an accounting firm, you can reach out to us. Just having somebody to talk through some of these things with can be so helpful at this time.
One thing I want to add in here, as you're making these decisions for your organization, make sure that your board is informed and aware, and it is recommended that you have your board take action on some of these items so that they're recognizing the steps that the organization is taking and they're voting on it so that it's documented in your minutes. Remember that board members are fiduciaries of the organization and they're responsible for paying attention to what's happening. So as leaders in the organization, make sure that you're keeping them informed and again, that they're taking appropriate action and that it's documented.
Good, thank you. I'm so glad you mentioned that. Sometimes as executive directors, you feel like you're out there on your own. At this time when you're making these big decisions, you need to make sure you've documented your board's approval. You don't want somebody coming back later and accusing you of doing something that they didn't intend to do. Next week, at the same time, same place, we'll delve into this in more deeply. We also have a resource for you in the link at the end of this slide. Nonprofit Finance Fund has had 2 excellent seminars so far. Yesterday was part 1. Today at 1 o'clock is part 2. I strongly encourage you to go to the website. If you have time today, jump on that site. The recording and the PowerPoint slides from yesterday's financial management session will be up on their site. Just really practical ways to work through what does this look like when you put pen to paper, or fingers to an Excel sheet to get this done. People also asked about communication. How do we talk to people? When it comes to your employees and your volunteers who work with you, over and over and over again throughout the last several weeks, we have just heard time and time again that you have no worries about over communicating. People are going through a lot. You might have thought I told you that 4 times. They just right over because they're dealing with a lot of things right now. Take time to listen to your employees. If any of you have found things that have been helpful for you in your relationship with your employees, pop it in the chat box for everybody so that this can be a time of sharing. There's been some good seminars and webinars out there about ways to communicate. I know a number of you are with mental health places. So the mental health resources, you're actually, working with your clients and yourself for your mental health at this time. Listening to your employees, talking to them about what they're going through. We borrowed an idea from one of our clients where we have a closed Facebook group that's just for our firm, and every day Liz posts a question of the day, and some of them are just very lighthearted questions, and others are a little deeper questions, but it's just a way to get us all talking about. One question was, the strangest, most exotic food you ever ate. Another question was to name something on your bucket list. So just a chance for people to engage with each other. I know at one point we were having daily afternoon Zoom call-in sessions. At this point, we're back to weekly. But however you need to check in, I'm talking with some clients are checking in at 10 every morning and at 4 every afternoon. So whatever works for your organization to stay in touch and to manage your time. As far as communication with donors, there's some resources that kind of goes hand in hand with special events. AFP has resources on their site. PANO has some resources on their site. The Common Good United Way newsletter comes out weekly. They have some resources. Liz, I'm going to see, did you want to talk to some Giving Tuesday Now and some of these other things?
We're starting to see a lot of media around Giving Tuesday. Everyone's familiar with Giving Tuesday, which comes after Black Friday. But next week, 2 weeks from now, on Tuesday, May 5th, we'll be Giving Tuesday Now. And it's an opportunity to kind of jump on that wave and do some online fundraising for your organization right now. There is a link, or I'll make that a hot link, to go to the Giving Tuesday Now website for more information and some graphics that you can use. But it's, you can start plugging it on your social media channels now.
Good. The other thing when we talk about our nonprofit clients, a number of them, and you'll probably see this in some of the articles, are just reaching out to their donors and just saying, we just want to let you know we're thinking of you, we're all in this together. They're not necessarily asking for money. Others are calling donors and just talking to them and saying, we just want to let you know what we're doing. But also don't hesitate to ask. There's ways that you'll see on some of these websites that you can ask. And there are people, not necessarily everybody, but some people are in the position to help, even if it's in a small way. We're also seeing more nonprofits engage online. Probably a number of you saw, the penguins free at the aquarium, or Elmwood Zoo in Montgomery County showed the goats playing on the playground equipment. We're seeing performing centers take their performances online. So, 7 p.m. evening with the violinist, and where he plays several pieces and then talks a little bit about his craft. So opportunities for people to get a peek inside what you do. Even if you might be in certain situations where you can't necessarily showcase any of your clients, but you might be able to tell their story, or you might be able to tell a kind of fictionalized version of a true story. So ways that you can build relationships now that will pay off in the future. So how can you invest your time now to kind of line things up for when things open up again? So this was a question. Somebody had said, what's it going to look like after this? We do not have a crystal ball. This came out, there was a McKinsey report that came out this week. You can check it out at the link. Like many things that you're reading, it's a very sobering report. It looks at different aspects. However, they put together this 3x3, and I do realize the print's kind of small, but down this side was the concept of, the virus, and kind of, things go badly with the virus, things go better with the virus. Down at the bottom was the economic response. One was, bad economic response, the other was good. And then based on these different quadrants, what would happen? And what they said, and this is McKinsey, this is not me, that they said that chances are most experts feel that the world will end up in one of these 4 quadrants here, this gray section up here. And as you can see pictorially, overall, this shows, things getting badly, both health-wise and economic, but then getting better. This idea of this kind of check mark look, I've heard this referred to before. You see this a little bit more. People talk about a U shape where the bottom is a little flatter than this quick turnaround. But generally, this idea that there's this period of time when we're complete social distancing, and then this gradual emergence from social distancing. And as people start to emerge from the social distancing, you have manufacturing companies running again, construction running again. What does that look like? And as that starts to happen, the economy starts to rebound. I've heard several times, this is a recession that was created deliberately by governments because life was valued more than the economy, which is a good thing. It was not a recession that was brought about by outside forces. Generally, the world was experiencing a lot of prosperity. Will it take time? Yes, there's no doubt about it. It will, it does take time to recover. So what does that look like for nonprofits? So when we think about, planning, and, I encourage you to read the full article, but generally when you think about planning, you're going to plan for yourself in these 4 quadrants. What does it look like for us if, the economy gets back to where it was within 6 months, within 18 months, or within 24 months? What does that look like? How do we keep going at a certain level for 24 months? Let's say that's your worst case. Or, how can we get through the next 6 months? And what does that range look like? That's a really hard thing to go through. There's no doubt about that. That's a very difficult conversation to have and a really hard thing to figure out. But I found the article helpful in that it gave you a sense of, here's what generally experts believe would be the most likely scenarios. I think over the next 4 to 8 weeks, we'll have a better understanding. The governors on the mid-Atlantic coast, New York, Pennsylvania, Rhode Island, I think Connecticut and New Jersey are getting together and saying, what is it going to look like for us to start reopening economically? We're not talking about reopening next week, but they are talking about what will that look like. Other resources we have here, and then if you have any questions, please ask us. Thank you very much for joining us. Don't hesitate to reach out with any follow-up questions. We will send an invite out for our seminar next week, and you can pop questions on that as well. Caitlin, did you want to have any closing comments?
Hi, everyone. Again, You know, my only thing to add is just I know this is a lot of information for everyone. And if you do have questions, you know, please reach out to the Catalyst Center. Please reach out to the Regional Foundation Center. You know, please see us as resources. I know one thing that a number of you had questions on that, you know, didn't quite fit in with the topic for today was grants and getting grants from funders at this time. So please stay tuned for our grant writing series next month. We'll kind of get into some more of that. But if you have questions in the meantime, please feel free to send us an email, nonprofit@freelibrary.org. I'm happy to answer this question. So hopefully we'll see you back here next week. And thank you so much for joining us today.
Goodbye. We'll make these available for everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good weekend.